Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. We are excited this morning to be discussing courageous conversations and bridging the gap. This ever important topic is something that we are all working to learn more about and do a better job in our spaces in making all people feel welcome and included. And we are really excited to have some special guests with us today who can help us just improve the work we're doing and continue to expand this throughout our organizations. Just a couple of housekeeping tips this morning. This session is being recorded and will be shared with you following this morning's presentation. I invite you to put any questions in the Q&A box. We will be tackling all questions at the end. We received many questions from our registrants this time around, and we are trying to include them in the presentation. I think this is such a robust topic that the hour is going to go incredibly quickly, so please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A, and if time allows, we will get to additional questions at the end. And then we are, in an effort to be more inclusive ourselves, want to make sure you are aware that you can control the closed captioning. So please feel free to turn that on or off as you desire on your screen. Just a little bit about Big Buzz Idea Group. We know that many nonprofit executives lack the staff time, skills, and funding that they need in order for their organizations to thrive. Big Buzz Idea Group fills gaps in management, marketing, and event services so that you can focus on the big picture of your organization and position your organization to thrive. I'm Melissa Legowski, and I'm the founder and CEO of Big Buzz Idea Group. This morning, I am excited to have with us a dynamic panel who will be walking through and sharing their work in this space today. And so we have Mary Balistreri from MBT, More Business Today. We have Elizabeth Colon from Metaphrosis, Language and Cultural Solutions. And we have Candace Washington, who is from Pivotal Impact. So I would love to have our panelists come on screen with me. And I would love to invite you all to introduce yourselves and share with our guests what you are currently doing in the DEI space, because you've all been invited because of your devotion and work in this arena. And so Mary, will you please go first?
Sure. Thank you so much, Melissa, for including me in this wonderful panel. I am Mary Balistreri. I am the Mindful Business Coach at MBT, More Business Today. I believe that courageous conversations are really the key to creating belonging in the workplace. And I believe that self-awareness is the center of being an inclusive leader. Understanding yourself first, that's where the coaching comes in. And then developing that relationship with yourself to see your biases before you can then have those courageous conversations with your team and with your clients, if you're a business owner or somebody who's developing business. As a cisgender white woman, I know that I continue to learn all of the time, and all of us should not be afraid of what we don't know. So I just wanted to say that my most recent thing that I'm going to be doing is a Train the Trainer course at the Selma Center for Nonviolence, Truth, and Reconciliation, and that starts in March. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you so much, Mary. Elizabeth?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Melissa and the team, for allowing me to be here. My name is Elizabeth Colon, and I am the president of Metaphrosis, Language and Cultural Solutions. It is an interpreting and translation company, and we connect businesses with linguists to kind of break down the language barriers. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, my company actually works on that, on the inclusivity part, right? Language is a big component of human connection. And if you're not speaking the same language to your clients or your employees, you're not including them in the space. So that is one area in which I work with DEI, which I've been doing for the past 15 years. The second place where I'm working on diversity, equity, and inclusion is through my role as the president of NABO Chicago. I am in my second year, but during my first term, I made it a point that we were going to create an environment where everyone is welcome to NABO. And we've done a really great job and growing our membership through that purpose. And women are really feeling the strong connection and community by the work that we're doing all together on the board. And then in the third place where I'm working on D&I is a lot, I know, but I have a special project that I'm undertaking with the Safety Net Hospital in Chicago. And I am helping them with their DEI initiatives, and that's working really well. But it actually trickled into something more, and that is also addressing social determinants of health that actually falls into the DEI space for our employees and our community as a whole. And I'll talk more about that later.
Elizabeth, for those who don't know what a safety net hospital is, can you expand on that for briefly?
Sure. So Safety Net Hospital mainly is a nonprofit hospital that gives more charitable than they do kind of profits. So we accept payments. We accept patients regardless of their inability to pay. And we work with addressing their social and economic needs. So a lot of the patients that we serve at this hospital are underserved, have many challenges, food insecurities, transportation issues, language barriers, health issues. And so our focus in these safety net hospitals is really to take them from point A to point B, which is to create a healthier lifestyle for them by giving them all the resources, the health cares and tools that they would receive, or you and I or someone else may receive somewhere else in a for-profit hospital.
Thank you so much. I think that's important for people to understand because it really does play into a lot of the work you're doing. Candace?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, Melissa and team. I'm excited to be among this esteemed panel of women this morning, and just wanted to share with you. So my name is Candace Washington. I am the CEO and founder of Pivotal Impact Learning, which is a talent and culture development company. And our work is really twofold. So on one hand, we help organizations really equip young professionals and new leaders with the necessary equitable professional development tools and workshops and resources so that they can truly authentically navigate and perform at their highest level and really accelerate their performance as well. And then we also focus in the DE&I space on making sure that we're advancing inclusivity and belonging in the workplace by making sure that managers in the workplace are really upskilled to create that strong culture through inclusive communication, as well as the interpersonal relationships that are needed to foster the belonging that's necessary between the multicultural and multi-generational employees that are entering the workforce today. So DE&I is really infused at the helm of all that we do, all of our workshops, all of our experiences, to make sure that people are aware of what they bring to the table and understand their own identity and how they can authentically navigate with that and create what they can do as an individual to advance DE&I and B within the workplace. So we really take pride in the fact that we are who we serve and we've lived the lessons we teach. We really focus on helping emerging leaders thrive in these spaces because of the lived experiences that we have had as a diverse team of consultants navigating in the workplace. And so that is the work that we do, and we're happy to be here.
I think that that's so powerful and important. I think we all, continue to be aware that we just have these lived experiences. I mean, it's really our lives that bring us to, these different lenses that we look at things through, and sometimes don't even realize the lenses that we've accumulated over the years. So really excited to have you all here. So I'd love to have you start out. I know we're going to cover a lot of things today, but can you tell me a little bit about what you are seeing for best practices in this nonprofit space or even in corporate environment? Because I continue to think that any good work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space continues to be, it's work we want to see filter through into the nonprofit arena, knowing that most of our guests are nonprofits today. But I would love to just see, how what best practices you're seeing out there, because I know a lot of people they're new, right? And Mary, you said to the point, right? We're constantly learning. When you know better, you can do better, and so we know it's a journey. But Elizabeth, I would love to have you start with any best practices that you're seeing and want to share with the group.
Sure. So some of the best practices we're seeing is that we hear a lot about, we want to meet this quota, bringing in certain minorities, and we want to provide them with probably some training, but I think it's a little bit more than that. And what I'm seeing is that organizations taking it a step further. So we all have unconscious bias, right? And in some of the spaces in where we work, there may be times when we may encounter a group or population that we don't effectively know how to ask a particular question or engage them. And so putting employees or the organization through a training, which helps them better understand and be more empathetic to a particular group, helps the organization thrive. So currently I am vetting companies to do training at the Safety Net Hospital for employees, because we see a lot of patients who are from the LGBT community. And how do you ask them about like their sex or their gender without feeling uncomfortable? And that's a really great practice, because we cannot forget that a lot of the work that we do within our organizations, it's the lower level employees, sometimes the people who are face fronting are key to the success of our organization. And we can talk about it all we want at the higher level with our executives and our leadership team, which they will buy into that, but we have to make sure that it trickles down to the entire organization. And I think keeping these employees and the entire organization informed actually builds up the momentum and the culture within the organization to want to do well. And I think that's one key factor that I think in best practices, that we don't look always at the percentage of the numbers of who we want to bring in, but that we intentionally bring in the correct resources for everyone. And I think that is what's going to create best practices for an organization. On the flip side of that, with another organization is, how do we make people feel welcomed, right? I think that's really key too, is that we have to create welcoming environments as best practices, which is very simple, right? It's acknowledging people. It's saying good morning. It's placing a smile. It's asking, tell me a little bit about your culture or the holidays that you celebrate. Very small little things that we can do that will take an organization a long way.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Candace?
Sure. I think that if I could add anything, it would be number one, Elizabeth touched on education, right? And I think that what we've seen is that education from the top down is essential from the start. I think that in addition to, trainings don't do it all, right? And there has to be a way to foster connection within the organization and intrinsic motivation as to why DE&I is important, why the culture is important, and what's in it for even the person, what they can do as an individual to be fostering that environment. I think it's not enough for us to say that I think we say that it's a business imperative, but we need to have people to embrace it and want to see the change versus it being like a compliance mechanism, if you will. And we've heard that a lot in certain situations. I think that there's an opportunity. What we see a lot in organizations is that it's being pushed on people versus there being a real clear opportunity or push to help people understand how to connect through curiosity and what that looks like organically, and how that shows up in different situations. Elizabeth gave really good examples of just, what belonging looks like from an everyday standpoint. And it's little things that we need to focus on as individuals and what those things are, and making sure that people really understand that it doesn't have to be a grand gesture for belonging to exist, for inclusivity to exist. There can be little things that people can do every day. So helping people understand what they bring to the table and how they contribute to the bigger goal, and the bigger environment and culture, I think is key. And sometimes people get really confused with that. So educating in that way, I think is really important.
Thanks for sharing that, Candace. I really love that connect through curiosity, because I think that that's sometimes, right, people get uncomfortable asking what they don't know. And we have to start to, and I love, Elizabeth, like when you were talking about kind of even your front line, really having the tools that they need to talk to people and be able to kind of bridge the gap, right? It's part of what we're talking about. So I love that. Mary, what are you seeing in best practices that you'd like to highlight this morning?
Okay, so first of all, I agree absolutely with what Elizabeth and Candace said. And I think it can become so overwhelming sometimes for organizations because there's so much out there. They need to do this and they need to do that. And often I hear it's difficult to get those people at the top on board, as Candace was saying. And then the neglect of the frontline people creates, you start to make some progress at the top or at the management level, and then you've kind of lost the base of the people who feel they don't belong in your everyday ways. So it gets to be very overwhelming. And my thought is to focus on two things: equity and belonging. And the reason that I say that is, so what is equity versus equality? It's giving opportunities to people. It's not everybody has the same opportunity because you all work at this company. It's starting to think about it through a different lens, right? Maybe look at your job descriptions as a first place. Do you really need to have a master's degree, to do this job? Or, just taking a look at those things, the playing field. Another one is to look at recruiting. And then ultimately for me, getting ready to have those conversations, making a safe space for people so that I think what happens a lot of time is the white people in the organization are either afraid of doing something wrong or saying something wrong, or they're afraid of losing something. Creating an atmosphere where people who are of color, LGBTQ plus people, all the people who are different in your organization, their voices are being heard. And at the same time, you're having a conversation with the people who are afraid to be on board. So that's my 2 cents.
You bring up a really great point too, Mary. I think, right, the social justice movement of the last 2 years has really kind of sparked a lot of this DE&I to become forward and front and center, but it really expands to so much more, right? I mean, it's, to the deaf, to the blind, to the disabled in any capacity. It's so much more. And I think that really, I have a friend that, she always talks about how important it is to come from this place of love and back to the curiosity, and just wanting to ask the questions, because when you know more, you understand more, and you can be more sympathetic and empathetic and just plan a little bit better. And I think that, to your point, knowing that why is so important. As we think through this, the other thing that I think happens with this too, right? I would love to hear, you guys are seeing a lot of this as you're doing work in this space. What have been some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen organizations making around this? And Mary, I'll have you go first this time.
Okay, the biggest mistake, and I see this very often, is companies are just in a hurry. They just want to check the box, and they have a one-off training, and they're, and it's like, well, we had that DEI and B training last year, so we're covered. But that's not the kind of thing that promotes belonging or promotes change. So that's the number one thing, is it's a journey. Excellent.
Candace?
Sure. I would actually piggyback on something that Mary said earlier about the mistake I see a lot is, the checking the box comes with this confusion between the equality and the equity. And I think that, especially, I've seen it personally in a lot of organizations when it comes to the onboarding process and what that may look like. I've personally lived that experience where in one organization I was in, me growing up as a Black woman from the inner city, first generation college student as well, there was a lot that I didn't know when I got into the workforce. And so being in a cohort of young professionals like myself coming into the corporate environment in a Fortune 500 company, it was really challenging to know a lot of things. So my onboarding experience, as I sat in a room being the only person of color, was very different when it came to even digesting certain information that they were sharing. So for instance, even when, And I'll just give this as an example. When we talk about the equitable experiences, even equitable onboarding, there was a gentleman in my onboarding session that was speaking about 401k, and no one in my family at the time had a 401k. And I was lucky if someone had a pension at the time. And so we were receiving information, and then the 401k information was glossed over in the interest of time. And then the comment was, oh, don't worry about this. Your parents can explain this to you. And so I felt really small in that moment. And it took me like 7 months to try to figure out my 401k on my own, because I didn't have anyone to turn to who could help me. So when we're thinking about what is the experience of everyone in the room, right? You're thinking that you're pushing out initiatives as you're forming programs, whether it's onboarding, whether it's recruiting, whether it's, attraction. What is the language you're using? How are you communicating to your people? Do you know who's sitting in the room? And so taking the time to get to know that, especially with this generation that's coming in the door, because I'm an advocate for them because I was them, right? And I think that that's very, very key at any point in our lives across that spectrum. Take time to understand who's in the room and how you're going to give them an equitable experience versus, something that's equal across the board. So I think that when it comes to that, I think that's what I see a lot of mistakes for. People just have a blanket solution, and it's not technically a solution because it's not equitable. So that's what I'd have to add.
Can I just ask you, Candace, too, on that? Because I think, so we'll hear and then maybe make assumptions that it's going to be people of color who will need something. And I grew up poor as well. Mm-hmm. I was in the same boat when people talked about 401ks. I didn't have my first opportunity for one until I was 44, I think. But I'd love to hear, how should people approach that? How should the manager approach that to not make the assumption, but not offend?
That's a really, really good question. I'm so glad you asked that, Mary. So when it comes to, it's back to the connecting through curiosity, because you don't want to make the assumption, right? Because then it's a huge microaggression at that point. At that point, you've rubbed me the wrong way. Don't assume I could be from, Highland Park with living in a ridiculously huge home. No offense to no one who is. I'm still trying to get there. But but the point is that I think that it's going back to the connecting through curiosity. We should not make assumptions across the board. I can't make assumptions. I should make assumptions about someone from Highland Park necessarily, right? I don't know what their story is. So we have to take the time to get to the story and connect with people as who we are, right? Not because of our color, not because of the assumptions of that we come in the door with and the biases that we have that we enter in. And it may be uncomfortable, and people are fearful to ask questions, but there's ways in which we can do it. And I think that is where I talk with people and empower them to say, do the work, do the work to identify, especially if you're a leader, how do I develop my inclusive behaviors? How do I become more self-aware? But then how do I connect through curiosity with others? And I think that everyone in this room, kudos to you, because you're trying to do just that. That's why you're here. You're asking the right questions, but then doing the research on your own is very helpful as well to make sure that you're creating that space and you're connecting from a place of a genuine place where people receive the questions that you have in a way that says they just want to know. And that will make things better because it's coming from a genuine place. So that was I hope I answered the question, Mary.
It's so beautiful, Candace, because really, we all just automatically, the things we've experienced, we assume others have too, but they haven't.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter who they are. We all have that lens framed from our lived experience again. Absolutely. And so I think really being able to ask those questions, I know even kind of talking to that point, even with hiring, like here at Big Buzz, I know, we want a more diverse workforce. And so we have to, I've really looked at it like, what do I have to do differently, right? How have I not been attracting more diverse candidates? And what does that look like? And so I really am starting to realize I need to go to different places. I need to reach out in different ways. And it all starts with that awareness, because without it, it's hard to change your own patterns. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Absolutely.
Elizabeth, what mistakes are you seeing?
I love all of this. Thank you. I'm like mesmerized by what everyone's saying here. There are two things that I'm noticing. So when I joined the Health Equity Committee, I came in as a volunteer. And what I realized over time was that I had the power as the volunteer, not necessarily part of the staffing, to be able to share and bring more to the table about things that I wasn't seeing or the mistakes that they were being. And there are two things specifically. The one is, now that I identify a company to do training for the entire staff, and I'm not only talking about line staff, I'm talking about the leadership staff, I'm talking about the two boards within the hospital. I think we all have to be on the same page, is the amount of time, right? So we have a commitment to do this, but we're not putting in the commitment to offer more hours than we need to learn and to create. So we went from 4 hours to 90 minutes. And it's a journey. 90 minutes is only touching the tip of DEI. And we have to continue that. And the argument is, I don't have time to send my employees. They do this, they do that. And I get all of that. But if we're making an investment, and any organization is making an investment on something so big like this, it's going to require many, many, many hours. And you can't check off the box by saying we did a 90-minute training to the entire staff. It's not going to correct the problem. The second thing that I would say that some organizations are making mistakes in is that you may have already an organization that's very diverse. You need to include them in the conversation, because they are the ones that are going to tell you what you need to know to develop the programs and the services within your organization. Our organization at the Safety Net Hospital is 70% minorities, and they all are from the community. What a great asset you have there, right? And I suggested that we need to do like an open forum. Let's talk about this. Let's get the feedback from the employees. And I immediately got knocked down. And the reply was, if we bring them into the room, all they're going to do is complain. Are they really complaining, or are they really wanting to share with you, the leaders, what's happening internally and why they don't feel inclusive, right? Or that why things are not equitable within the organization. So we have to begin to listen to our most important asset. And I always go back to the employees, because they are our most important assets. They are the brand of the organization. They are the ones front facing when people walk in through the doors or when they answer the phone calls. We need to hear and listen to them, because they are going to make us more successful as we continue doing the work in this space. And if we ignore them, we all know what happens, right? Low morale, people leave, you can't hire. There's just a lot of problems that come with that, because we are not taking the time to hear them out, acknowledge them when we see them, and recognize them for the great work that they're doing.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And I think, going back to your first point as well, it's interesting, right? You've got to make the time for it. And I know I saw a presenter recently that did an amazing job helping people understand their own lens, but it sounded like all the things she wanted people to do, like it could be a full-time job. I mean, it really could consume us, right? But so, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later in today's conversation, right? But doing something is definitely better than doing nothing. And it's a journey, it's a process, right? It's not one and done. And so I think continuing to make time and space for that when people can is so important. So Candace, I'm going to have you start off our question this time. And I would love to have you share how nonprofits and associations can create safe spaces where people can best explore their differences and create that deeper understanding of one another. I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important for everybody to kind of be able to come and feel safe, right? That's different.
Yeah, I think that number one, when it comes to feeling safe, it has to be, it can't just be a statement that exists somewhere, right? It has to be in action. And I think that, we're so quick now to put out diversity statements. We're so quick to put out like you said, like everyone has said, in trainings about, what certain things should look like, but it has to be ingrained and lived from, and I would say the top down. I always believe in modeling the way, right? Leadership should be modeling the way. And so in terms of creating safe spaces, I always say it starts from the top down. Now, individuals can do the work as well. Let's say if you're a manager on a team, right? In terms of creating that safe space, you can set goals in terms of what are you stating that the culture of what the culture of feedback is, what the culture of communication is within your team, establishing what the norms will be within your environment on your even personal team, and modeling the way. Because ideally, it'd be great, like if we were in, a corporate utopias, association utopias, wherever type of organization you're in, but we're not, right? So we can't wait for, the leadership to always pull the trigger and do what they're supposed to do. We're all learning, as you said when we started, Melissa. So we're all in that journey. But we can be leaders right where we are and start to have the conversations, establish what the norms should look like, and then live those norms and model those norms. And put them at the top of every conversation. If you're a manager on a team, making sure that you are starting even your meetings with your team with talking about things outside of the workplace, right? In terms of, and you can do this in virtual settings, asking questions where you're getting to know each other. This is what building relationships is all about. Then we start to break down those things and we empathize with one another because we see the true people that we are. We're not just, Candace in accounting or, whomever, right? It's like, oh, that's a real person with real feelings. And, oh, turns out they're a lot like me, even though they may look differently or they may have different preferences and different things like that. I think that, making sure that we're intentional about creating the spaces to get to know each other better, build relationships. There's various tools to do this as well that turn out to be activities for teams, and they're not just regular team building, but they can be infused every day so that we're getting to know each other as people and connecting, truly connecting with each other, and modeling the way. And I'd always have to go back to that.
I love it. Elizabeth?
I think Candace said it all. I mean, it's really about connecting with people. I would say invite them to the table, bring them to the table, acknowledge that you've seen them, that you hear them, and that you understand them. That's all people want. They want to be heard, they want to be seen, and they also want to be understood. And what better way than that, than inviting them to the table, have those conversations with you and opening that dialogue in a space where they feel comfortable doing it. And I won't go any further because, like I said, Candace did a great job answering that question.
Thank you. Mary, anything to add?
As usual, I agree with both Candace and Elizabeth. And I just wanted to add on to that, what happens in your organization when somebody is a concern? Thinking ahead of time to how you'll handle that so that there can be a conversation. I mean, that's a huge part, right, of safety and belonging. Do your employees feel empowered to bring something up? If you're asking for their input, then what do you do once they give you their input? That kind of goes back to the mistakes, but what happens a lot of times is organizations will say, okay, I'm supposed to ask for their input, that the employees feel like they have a voice, and then the employees respond and they never hear anything ever again, right? So it breaks trust. That's the transparency that Candace was talking about as well. Making people valued. How do you do that? The respect, asking them for their input, and giving them table. And then, and I can't emphasize enough that leaders really need to work on their own self-awareness, because sometimes the leader isn't open to what they're hearing and they don't even realize it. They don't know why. So
I think that's so important to
But
take action on those conversations and report back, right? I know one organization that we work with recently did a survey, not even anything related to DE&I, but they didn't report back on the survey, and people like wanted to know, like, I shared my thoughts, like, what was the outcome? What are you doing with that? So it's just a really great, simple example. And the other thing you touched on, Mary, too, we just, in our monthly newsletter, we actually just put out an article yesterday about crisis management planning and the importance of doing it when you're not in crisis, because you have a clearer head, you have more time to process and think about things and really think them all the way through, to your point. So I think that's really great additions. Elizabeth, I'm going to have you start on this next question. So I think that as we go through this process, differences are bound to come up in our organizations from time to time, especially as we try to navigate into some new levels of understanding. What is your recommendation for how to best navigate any differences or problems that might arise within our organizations?
Sure. First of all, if you don't have a safe place, it's going to be very challenging, right? For that feedback to come in. I find that within organizations, including upper management, leaders at the table, isn't a way of doing it. I think there's no transparency within organization. No one's going to walk in and want to talk about an issue that they're having, especially, I think Mary touched on it, if you do nothing about it, right? You have to have a process for that. I'm going through an experience myself where I think accountability is needed, right? When something is happening and they're stating that there's a problem and people are speaking up and nothing's being done and no one's held accountable, then it's not worth anyone else coming to the forefront and sharing anything more. So there has to be a process for that of, you come to me and you say, this is the issue I have, then what's the follow-up from that? You don't just dust it off and then just put it on a shelf and say, I heard you and that's it, right? There has to be more to that. Organizations and their employees really want to feel that when they come and share something, that some actionable steps are going to take place. They may start small, because sometimes that's how it is. You just can't be too reactive and say, this is what we're going to do and we're done. I think it goes back to that little journey step that we got to, right? So this first step is, we're going to do this, and then we're going to follow up with this. And then the second step will become this. If we didn't get the follow-up for the first time around, right? It takes time. And some people are hesitant. They want to see fast actions, but fast action doesn't get you where you want it to be, where you want to be. And I like to use an example, and I think this, I don't know why this resonated with me, when the police officer was released from jail for the Laquan shooting, and they did the protest. And the family of Laquan was saying, well, I want him to be federally charged. That's it, right? That was the quick action step that they were taking. But the uncle came in and said, no, that's not going to solve the problem. Let's defund the police department. Those are actionable steps that's going to take a while to accomplish, and it may result in a positive outcome. I don't know. But when I heard that, I quickly, for some reason, kind of tied it into the work that I'm doing, because sometimes we want quick action steps and it doesn't give us the answers at the end of the day that we were truly looking for. So we have to be really careful on how we do that.
Well, and I think, right, I mean, this is something that has been kind of swept under the rug and institutionalized in so many ways. I mean, over hundreds of years. Like, this is not a quick fix, but it is that showing up every day with a little bit more awareness and doing a little better than before. Mary, what do you have to add for this question?
In addition to having that policy, as a leader, bringing that to your team and walking through it as a team and saying, here's what happens if something comes up. This is the policy for how we handle that. And leaders saying, I am open to what's going on with you. My door is open. Please come and tell me, and we'll talk about where it rises to the level of this particular policy. Or can we work on it if it's with a team? Can we handle it ourselves through a conversation? I think that is something that's really important for leaders to do. And then when there is a situation, we know that sometimes the specifics cannot be talked about because there might be an HR issue and some kind of action might be being taken. For everyone from an organization to realize that if people don't know what happened, they will make up their own stories. And those stories into the gossip mill, and that becomes the truth. So individual leaders talking with their team and saying, we know there was a situation. I can't give the specifics because it's an HR issue, but what can they say? This is what it was. Here's how the organization is handling it, making you sure that you have that transparency. And an example, I was working with a nonprofit just last year, and they had exactly this sort of a problem because they did a survey. And there was a lot of talk in the beginning stages of the survey of what the results were. They were transparent in the beginning. And then they went and worked with the leadership team, which was great, to help the leaders develop a better sense of belonging, a better sense of how to have conversations. They instituted a good deal of coaching, which I have seen as the surest way to help evolve through the one-on-one, where they have that opportunity to talk about their stories. So they invested in all of that. And then 8 months went by. And once again, it was the frontline people who were saying, we took the survey, we heard that we were going to do all these things, and now we haven't heard anything. Making sure that you're keeping the communication open and transparent with all of the players who are involved is really an important step in that process.
I love that. And the quote that jumps to my mind is the most common problem with communication is that people think it's happened, right? And so being so intentional and making sure that the communication, and in the article like that I referenced earlier too, talking about communicating to all the audiences, right? Like within the nonprofit space, sometimes we go with our staff, we go with the boards, we go with our donors, but what about the internal team? What about the volunteers? Like really thinking about all of those connections and making sure everyone is communicated with and regularly, so incredibly important. Candace, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm back in the camp with Elizabeth and Melissa, and I'm going to tell you, like we say in my church, when we hear something profound, I'm over here nodding my head. We just say, "That's good, that's good," and I'm like, "Good, good." I love everything that they're saying, from especially from the transparency to the long game. That example that Elizabeth gave, I love hearing that, because it's the I tend to not want to work with organizations who want to check the box. I've identified those who do. I've had partners flat out say, like, "Oh yeah, we kind of want to do this for for the sake of perception, and I'm just like, I may not be the right partner for that, because I want to influence change. And if you're not truly ready, then there's plenty of people that will help you check the box." So the long game, I think, is what's important. People need to, recognize that that's where the most value is, and it's where you want to be to make sure that you're doing things the right way and you're creating sustainable outcomes. So that's a little piece that I add.
Thank you. In one of the presentations I saw recently, this example really stood out to me, and I think that it's a good segue into this next question. But there was a female real estate agent who stood up in the audience, and she expressed how for years, right, like that the realtors would guide people to the neighborhoods where they wanted them to buy, where they wanted to keep them with other people and at different levels, and it really just, it struck such a chord of like, I was just so unaware. It seems so obvious when you think about it that you're like, yeah, that's a really great way to keep this segregation and separation and to really kind of protect these systems that had been structured and set up. And I was like, it helped open my eyes of how I need to look at things through new lenses. And so I do think that, there's a lot of places where we have policies and procedures that are systemically unfair and inequitable that really, again, right, just because it's always been that way to some of us, we just don't think to always question it. But I would love to have you guys share with us, and Mary, I'm going to start with you on this one, but what should we be doing to lead our organizations down a path to support fair and equitable practices and help break down some of those systemic policies that people just kind of carry over without really much thought?
I think the place to start, and Elizabeth said this earlier, is take a look around at who's at the table when you're looking at the policy. And speak out if somebody is not represented. So the way to know if a policy is not fair is to have a group of individuals looking at it together. Something that Microsoft does that I was very impressed with, they're focused on diversity and they include accessibility as part of that. And what they do, of course, they're gigantic, but they bake in every single team. So they have 1 million employees or however many. So they bake into all of their committees, whether developing software, whether it's testing something, creating policies, diverse people, including accessibility. So people who might be, deaf or blind or disabled as part of that mix as well. They looked around the table and decided this group is saying. And I see that as a point of allyship as well for some people who are, that might say, I'm not in management, I don't know what to do, is take a look around if you're at the table and speak up. Who's missing? Who's not being represented?
Thank you. Candace, your thoughts?
100%. Mary stole my answer. She stole my answer. So I would say, I just play Mary, but I mean, what I 100% agree. I mean, the first thought that comes to mind, and I'm not trying to push that all organizations need, a consultative, frame or support. But I do think it's one of those things where sometimes when we're in it, when they say you can't see the forest for the trees type of thing, I think, that's why even when people are hiring within organizations and associations, you're trying to get new perspective, a new lens, something from. So I think there's two ways, in addition to making sure that you're looking at policies and you have the perspective of everyone who could be affected, represented at the table, sometimes having that outside lens as well. So having that expert lens who has seen this across many, many different organizations can sit there with you and, make sure that they're guiding you through the process and say, hey, you're in this, you're so in this that you can't see X, Y, and Z. But let me tell you what we've seen, and what may be helpful for you here. And where we see that you're doing well, where we see that there's some areas of opportunity. And then, probe with that a little bit and sit with it. And then, help other people to kind of bring their perspective. And like you said, examine who is not represented, right? Who is not heard, who is not seen, and who is not going to benefit or who will be at a disadvantage for a particular policy or a practice within the organization.
When we think about that too, I love the sharing about the independent third party. I think that one of the questions that came in, from our registrants was really, what if leadership's not buying into this? What if not everybody at every layer in my organization, right? Because I've heard in some organizations, boards are not necessarily on board with this. And so that whole concept about the independent third party sometimes helps reiterate the importance, helps talk about why it matters, helps kind of be able to hopefully garner some additional support for those people within an organization who really are seeing the value and wanting to do the right thing for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
So I really like that you brought that up, Candace. Elizabeth.
I would just add, look at your mission and your values for your own organization, and then check to see if internally that is reflective of the people who work for you as well. I think that's important. You know, we can go out and say we do all of this, but your own people may be experiencing the same things that is bigger than the organization. For example, if you are serving a population within your community that is underrepresented and lacking certain basic needs, well, internally, are your employees facing the same challenges, right? And it could be more, it could be beyond just pay. It could be, like I mentioned, earned food insecurities. You may have employees living paycheck to paycheck. It could be housing issues they can't afford, but you're doing it externally. Look also internally and see how you can change your policies and procedures to be reflected of the entire community, the external community, but also the internal community.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I knew this hour was going to go really fast because there's so much to talk about. So we're going to go into a little bit more of like lightning round to try to see how much we can get through for everybody on the call today. Candace, I'm going to start with you. And on this one, I would love for you guys to raise your hand, although this one I kind of want everyone to talk on. But, you know, if you guys feel compelled to answer one of these, please offer up the opportunity. But Candace, for this one, we'll start with you. What tips do you have for organizations who are just beginning their DEI journey?
So just beginning, I think I actually did a talk with the Association Forum in their Welcoming Environment Summit. And we talked about this a little bit as well in terms of when you're just starting. I would say that we talk a lot about education, right? We have to start somewhere because we need to make sure that, and I hesitate to say make sure everyone's on the same playing field, because that's not going to happen when it comes to, you know, what the topics that we're discussing. But you want people to have at least a baseline knowledge, right? From the leadership down, of understanding the concepts that and the constructs as well that are associated with DE&I and what it means, what the language is around it. So at least there is some baseline understanding of what is it that we're talking about? Why is it important? What does it mean for me as a person, as an individual? What does it mean for my organization? And so I think that education, number one, is key, especially at that board level. Right? You know, you mentioned that sometimes the board is not on board, and they have to actually be educated as well. And that's a lot of where the work starts, making sure that persons at all levels within the organization, that level of education is cascaded across the board, so that not the board, but the organization, so that everyone understands the language and what is actually taking place and why it's imperative to the organization as well.
Thank you. Mary Elizabeth, any quick thoughts on that?
I think she said it really nicely. I would just add, don't rush it. Don't rush the process. It's not going to happen overnight, but just make sure that when you start the process, that you complete the steps that it's taking, instead of just putting things on hold and say, I didn't get to it, or get to it next time.
Absolutely.
If you commit to something, to report back at a next meeting, or, you know, follow up with leadership, that you get those things done, because that's only going to help you succeed in getting it done within a certain time frame. But still being said, do not rush the process.
And I'll just add to that, have a plan. Maybe there's only 3 things on there. First 6 months is education. The second 6 months is going to be, let's learn how to listen. And then maybe the next months to the next year is to actually have listening sessions, something, whatever those are, but write down with the dates so that you've got the next step to move to.
Great advice. So, ladies, that is going to bring us right up to the close of the hour. Mary, I know that you've got an event coming up that you wanted to share with folks today in case they want more on this topic. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe share a link?
Yeah, I've got a link here in the chat. So people are often like, they're so overwhelmed. Like, what should I learn first, or where should I start? I work with a group called Diversity and Inclusion Strategists, and we are hosting Black History Jeopardy on February 23rd, which will be just a fun way for people to jump on, learn a bunch of stuff, and enjoy themselves. Even inviting, depending on where your team is, maybe you invite your team, and then it gives you something to talk about later. But that's a place to start the learning.
That's wonderful. So I do thank you all for joining us for the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. We offer these sessions on the second Thursday of every month. Next month, we're going to be talking about mental wellness in the workplace and protecting our most valuable assets, which is our people, and going to have a great panel to talk about some best practices around what we can be doing to support ourselves as well as our team members. And also, we do remain available to you. If you have additional questions about this topic or any other topic, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are trying to connect people with the resources they need to thrive. And thank you again for being with us for the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. And thank you to all of our guest panelists for such a wonderful discussion this morning. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
So thank you, Elizabeth and Candace.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you all. Great to be here.